All right, hi everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of our Q&A online. Today we are doing a Q&A surrounding National Reconciliation Week, and we're joined by some very special guests today. Rhys Peden, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rep. We are also joined by Professor Irene Watson, Pro Vice Chancellor, Aboriginal Leadership and Strategy, and our Vice Chancellor, Professor David Lloyd. Welcome everybody.
Cheers, Noah.
So we're going to start off with an acknowledgement of country. So UniSA respects the Kaurna, Bunganditj and Barngarla people's spiritual relationship with their country. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to those people living today. We acknowledge the diversity of Aboriginal peoples past and present. So we took questions from students over the course of a week for this Q&A, and what we're going to do today is go through. Myself and Rhys will be asking the questions that the students have sent in, and David and Irene will be answering those on behalf of the university. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So question 1, does UniSA employ Indigenous psychologists to promote culturally sensitive therapy? David or Irene, who wants to answer that one?
I'm happy to answer. I mean, so if you look at it through a staff lens, we have this thing called the EAP, which is an employee assistance program, and through the EAP, Aboriginal staff can request to have an appointment with an Aboriginal clinician. That's a managed service which is provided outside the institution. Inside, when you look at counselling, from a student perspective, the counselling team doesn't have any Aboriginal clinicians on staff, but all the counsellors that we do have all attend the Aboriginal Cultural Safety workshop that we do through UniSA. We work with Rinka Student Services to provide student supports, and the Aboriginal student engagement officers, they give pastoral care and support to students. They're usually the SEU's first point of contact with Aboriginal students.
Excellent.
Yeah, I could add to that. I'm not sure if it's current, but there was and it may still be current. We did have one Aboriginal counsellor who was working with the team of counsellors that were offered to staff. So there has been some initiatives in that space taken up.
Rhys, I believe you've got question 2.
Yes, so if students are interested in learning more about Aboriginal culture, what electives are available for them to take?
Sure, Rhys, there's about, so in terms of free electives, there's about 7 in the uni. There's one on law, land and peoples. There's one on Aboriginal cultures. There's one on rights and racism. There's one about Aboriginal Australians and the human services. There's one on education change in society. Now that's one that's not university-wide, but you can get permission to enroll in that. That's through education. There's one in nursing, which is on cultural perspectives on health, and there's one around comparative Indigenous studies. So they kind of span law, the humanities, health and education. 7 in total, and I think it's very difficult for people to just capture all that as I rattle them off. So what we'll do is we'll make sure we get those bundled up on a link and put on the end of the video as well.
Thanks.
They're already on the undergraduate electives webpage for if you want to search for them.
Excellent. So question 3 was one of the ones we got through Facebook. Why isn't it compulsory for all programs to have at least one Aboriginal course?
Do you want to go first?
Well, the university does require, we've had an ACUP policy since 2005, that's the Aboriginal Content and Undergraduate Programs, and that requires that each of the undergraduate programs includes a compulsory and accessible Aboriginal content, and depending on the program, that may be in the form of a single course or embedded across multiple courses in any particular program. So that's the current policy around Aboriginal content and undergraduate programs. And currently we have a lot of 2019, and we've just recently completed a review of which was involved an external panel of very senior expert Aboriginal academics from across a range of universities in Australia, have just recently completed a review, and that report we're currently working through. So yes, we do have a policy, and we're looking at how we can step up and really improve that space.
I guess the only thing I'd just add to that is that in some of the professional courses, the actual content is very highly prescribed by the accrediting bodies, and the headroom in an accredited program for additional curricular content is almost non-existent. So what we're trying to do is marry up what we can do around ACUP, around graduate qualities, and to make sure that we actually bring in Aboriginal content appropriately across the board and have it aligned and tailored for various areas. So some courses have lots of content and some have little, but some of that's got to do with the prescription that comes externally as well.
Yep, excellent. Question 4, Rhys.
Yeah. So David Uniapon is arguably our most famous Aboriginal elder. Is there any way that UniSA can honour him, such as naming a building or a meeting place after him?
Yeah, it's a good question, Rhys. So the Uniapon legacy is very strong in the uni. I don't know if you know, but in MAUD, David's recognised very visibly in MAUD as the whole foundation ethos for MAUD is based on 2 ways of knowing. And there's a great quote from David Uniapon on the wall in MAUD as we go in. And all of the Aboriginal content is actually done through that lens of 2 ways of knowing. And Irene and myself have been working up a scholarship program in the name of Uniapon as well, which we're bringing forward. So we're looking to preserve the legacy, to actually connect it not just to a physical thing, but also to the progression of knowledge and 2 ways of knowing through MAUD, but also then through a mechanism by which we can actually get greater engagement and attainment in education for Aboriginal students.
Yeah. Probably a lesser known honouring of David Uniapon in the establishing of the PVC Aboriginal Leadership and Strategy position. Yeah. There's also, I'm also the professor of David Uniapon professor.
Yeah.
So there's an acknowledgement there as well, which is embedded in that kind of Aboriginal leadership role.
Excellent. So question 5. So quite often there's a spotlight thrown on Aboriginal culture during Reconciliation Week, but how does UniSA engage with Aboriginal culture outside of Rec Week and throughout the rest of the year?
Yeah, I guess I think the idea that we're not connected, like that there's only a focus through one lens when Reconciliation Week is something that I want to kind of just dispel. I mean, the institution, just from its foundation legislation, is committed to engagement with Aboriginal culture. That goes back to 1991 and when the university was founded. The first university to have reconciliation statements, the first university to have a reconciliation action plan, the first uni in South Australia to have a stretch reconciliation action plan. And we have welcomes, we have acknowledgements of country, welcomes to country, welcomes to country, the use of language in terms of the way in which I do my graduation addresses, and increasingly now we're seeing increased use of language and Aboriginal language in the way we communicate. The recognition statements that we have, the workshops, the big workshop we do on Anangu language, and just recently there's some great engagement with the Anangu peoples who've been stranded in Adelaide as a result of COVID-19 and linked directly back to UniSA. But also things like, stuff that happens all the time, like our graduations, the processional music in graduation, Ancient Lights Processional, which talks to culture and connection. So, I mean, the university, I think, has great connection. The translation of one of the exhibits from MAUD out to the Mawson Lakes Library, which is which has welcomes in 44 language groups from across Aboriginal Australia. I think that it's an ongoing thing, and it's sort of part of the fabric of the institution. I don't know, Irene, if you want to comment further on that.
Yeah. Look, it is ongoing. It's a work in progress, and a lot of the information is outlined in the most recent Stretch RAP, which commits and is focused on action. So there's a lot of it's an action focused strategy, and much of the work we've moved along. The Aboriginal research strategy, for example, really embeds a very different approach. And as our VCs just noted, this two-way knowledges approach is embedded in the RAP. It's taken up in the Aboriginal research strategy. And so it's not only a cultural approach, it's also embedding and leading and paradigm shifting in its impact. And I think that that's the importance of not just simply giving acknowledgement and recognition, but also seeing how it translates in action and how that action in itself is transformative, such as I consider we're in first steps, early stages of the Aboriginal research strategy, which is being acknowledged across the country as very, very much leading in this space across universities. So that's one part. But also the recent ACUP, the approach to ACUP and reviewing that and ensuring that there's an embedding of a two-way knowledges approach is another example. But I would recommend everyone have a look at the RAP and see how the cultural approach is embedded across the university, not just in terms of acknowledgement, but also in actions as well, translating as action.
Yep, certainly. Reese, next question.
So, question 6. What practical things can students and staff members do as a matter of habit to demonstrate the principles of reconciliation across the whole year?
Do you reckon, Irene?
Well, I think we've made some good inroads. One of the projects that come out of the RAP and that we piloted in 2019 and we're continuing even under the challenges of COVID is the Elders in Residence program, and with that is the kind of developing a very respectful relationship with not only with elders, but elders are also in community and they're representative of a diverse range of communities from across Australia constitute our Elders in Residence group. So that's a good starting point, is to begin from very sort of culturally appropriate ways of acknowledging Aboriginal peoples, and largely it's through engagement with our elders and our elders in community. And a part of that process is always acknowledging country and local custodians and the peoples themselves and the languages and all of those different ways of being and protocols, but largely to find out more and to progress in an appropriate way is this engagement piece with elders in community in terms of having a very respectful relationship. So that's ongoing even under the challenges of COVID, and we're still meeting with our elders, and hopefully we'll be able to record and have translated out to students and set up links where students can engage and develop their understandings in relation to what are good ways of engaging respectfully with Aboriginal peoples.
Yeah, and on the staff side of the line, I mean, one of the greatest initiatives that was brought forward and it's been stewarded now very much by Irene is the cultural awareness workshops. We've had over 1,000 staff participate in that. And you think about that level of awareness being brought into the organisation. We ultimately want to have every single member of staff participate in those cultural awareness workshops, and that's something that goes on across the year. It's not just something that happens in Reconciliation Week. It's, I mean, you'll have seen from a council member's perspective, it's a very, very moving, engaging piece of education. And education is central to reconciliation, central to recognition, central to respect.
Certainly. The final question is for you, David. What does the VC think about acknowledging the unique contribution that Aboriginal people bring to certain roles through their cultural knowledge?
Yeah, I guess I think it's incredibly important to recognise that the qualities that individuals bring, which sit outside of their job specification or their education profile, and that's the unique, I guess, insight that they have to communities that they engage with. I would like to think that each of our staff members brings their own competencies from their own culture to every engagement that they undertake, whether Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. In the case of Aboriginal staff, as they bring Aboriginal knowledge into roles, it's also a case of how they bring those into roles where they engage with non-Aboriginal members of the community as well. So where it adds value and depth to the engagement that they have with the community, that's wonderful and it should be recognised and it's to be valued. But it's also as they bring that into that two-way knowledge, that transfer of knowledge and that transfer of culture and the appreciation of other cultures as they engage with everybody else, I think that's incredibly valuable for us.
So, Irene, did you want to add anything onto that question, or?
No. Well, I concur. Again, I can only reiterate that the Elders in Residence program has made and potentially will make into the future, great contributions to this space of engagement with staff, with students, and with community.
Certainly. Did anyone on the panel have any final comments that they'd like to make to address to students for Reconciliation Week? David?
I guess the most important piece about this Reconciliation Week is it's so unusual that it's happening in this way, that we're not connected physically. And it's very much Reconciliation Week is about coming together and celebrating culture and celebrating the fact that we are one group who come together to understand each other. But the bigger picture here in terms of COVID and its impact on these things, it's important to remember that we're all in this together, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, as a community together.
Certainly. Irene?
Yeah, we're all in this together, and I think it's an opportunity. It's both a challenge and an opportunity for us to reflect and to think about how it is we can really be not only in this together, but how we can be most respectful of the Aboriginal space while we're working towards a greater and more developed relationships.
Certainly. Reese, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I would just like to remind all students out there to see the reconciliation page on the UniSA website, available at unisa.edu.au/reconciliation week. It has a whole map of Reconciliation Week and what's planned. Please get involved, get engaged. It's great.
Thanks, Reese. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time, particularly David and Irene. I know exactly how busy you guys are at the moment, so thank you so much for taking the time to engage with us and with the students more broadly surrounding this extremely important issue. We'll be back hopefully in a few more weeks with another Q&A, so make sure that you guys keep an eye out for that one and engage with Reconciliation Week for the whole period. Thanks for having us very much, guys.
Well, thanks for your work too, Noah and Reese, and taking the initiative. Good on you.
Thanks, Irene.
See ya.
Thanks, David.
See ya.